We are so familiar with this cliche that desperate times call for desperate measures. Yet what I repeatedly see is a failure to adopt a desperate measure. Welcome to the Rich and Regular podcast, where we explore life at the intersection of money. I'm Julian.
And I'm Kirsten, and today's episode is a little different. We are going to be talking about the presidential election in the US and offering some thoughts and reactions, mainly from a financial lens, but just from two people that have a platform and like sharing our ideas and like having conversations with people.
Yeah, this is definitely unusual for us. There's a good bit of things that we've even done behind the scenes that I think makes this conversation a little different from what we've done in the past. Admittedly, when we prepare for a podcast to be recorded, we have a powwow, we have a brief that we're kind of following.
A structure.
This is
notes.
a little bit more no holds barred. I think given the weight of not just the room that we're in, but what feels like the weight of our social circle, our family, friends, the seriousness of the moment that we're in, I think it is just, to your point, maybe more appropriate for us to just have a little bit more time of open dialogue. We will eventually get to more structured and organized thinking, but I think where we are right now is a bit more of just time to react. And I will jump right in. I know, I have a friend we have a friend that are former political consultants, and it almost without fail, whenever there's a major election, they send us a note and text because for as long as we've known them, Georgia has been a little bit of a battleground state. And they're like, hey, man, what's going on? Boots on the ground. And he checked in and I was like, yeah, I was waiting, because in previous years, we'd started having conversations, far in advance. And he sent me a note and asked me how I felt. And I was like, yeah, I don't feel good. It actually feels like the Georgia that I grew up in. It felt like more like the Georgia that I, when I finished high school and went to college in, one that was much more decidedly red without question. And even now, I just did not feel, we actually live in Cobb County. So it was kind of weird seeing Cobb County on, the news and constantly being spoken of, even your family who lives north of here, that particular area being considered like a battleground county. And
They were blue.
They were. And so was Cobb County. But overall, it was like a feeling, like just based on what I saw. And obviously that's a small sample size of one. But it was a mood, it was a feeling. And then you asked me how I felt. I think it was the day before, like, hey, so who do you think? I think we're getting ready to have dinner. Who do you think is going to win? And I said Trump. I do think that Donald Trump is going to win. And you're like, really? Really? Like, nah, I think women are, when they came after their reproductive rights, I think that was like the thing that really got them, pissed off. And, you got to think about the moms. And I think right in that moment, we were watching the news and there was someone who was there voting with their children. And it was a man, it was a husband, wife, and I believe it was two daughters. And they were, kind of getting like a post reaction. And it seemed tense. I'm not even going to lie. Like reflecting back on that moment, it felt like I know what the mom is saying. Like she's standing up for herself, but she did not feel like she was doing it with like certainty or like great confidence or pride. It just almost felt like there was just so much focus on wanting to be on the right side of history. And I thought that was interesting. And then I looked at the dad and I was like, I think the dad just doesn't want his daughters to be mad at him, but I don't know that he actually really believes in this candidate, in this party. And so it was interesting. And I think for me, that's when I felt like, yeah, I think we are right back where we were. Like I felt this way before and I hoped I was wrong. I did not vote for Donald Trump by any means, but obviously we all know what happened. And so it has been weird. Last day or two has been weird. I've had some meetings. I am a board member on my son's PTA meeting, and that was such a weird, I would say, passive aggressive conversation. I felt like there were people wanting to express their anxiety and their frustration and put it out on other things. And, that's real. We're human beings. We went on the trail to take a walk, which is something that we do pretty regularly, but we like made a point. It was, we gotta walk this off. Like it was such, a feeling. I remember, previous moments feeling like this. And so, yeah, went on a walk and had a little moment of being a good Samaritan, which kind of made us feel good. And, people are always like extra nice on the trail on days like this.
They're extra nice in general,
They
but
are
they
extra
were
nice in general.
extra nice.
Everybody's like locking eyes and wanting to say, hey,
like, good
man,
morning.
how you
How
doing?
are you?
You doing all right? We good? All right. I'm out here just like you, man. It's just one of those things. And, all that to say, I just know that a lot of people are feeling some financial anxiety. And in fact, I would just say anxiety as a whole.
Yeah.
Like we were likely going to center the conversation around financial anxiety specifically.
No,
But
having a conversation.
yeah, for now, we're just, having a conversation. And so I'm going to ask how you feel, because I know you've been in here. We've had some cuddles.
Yeah, I mean, I realized that she was not going to win Tuesday night. I did not need to wait until Wednesday morning. I went to bed sad. I woke up sad when it was confirmed. But after our walk, I achieved a level of clarity that I was not expecting to come that soon.
Yeah.
And I think it's just because I'm so familiar with how this country works and thinks and what voters have been experiencing over the last 4 to 5 years. And I completely understand why they would do this, right? Like why they would vote this way. I think it's a bit of a cop out to suggest that people are voting out of their self interest because you're assuming that their self interest is based on their gender or their race. And for a lot of us, it is. But for many, many other people who are down to survival levels, who are in economically depressed areas, self interest is making sure that you can put food on the table, pay your bills, and find a job reliably. And regardless of whether you think a candidate is able to accomplish their campaign promises or not, if that's what they're talking about, then naturally those people are going to gravitate towards it. And so the days after the election, I've felt a little bit surprised by the amount of confusion that there has been around Democratic voters about why this happened. I've felt I've just felt concerned by the quickness in which we would resort to name calling and more insults as if that hasn't been proven to not work. It's not effective. And
no,
so
actually, it's you're basically creating, you're giving them free fuel to their fire.
Yeah, like
it reminds me of the deplorable comment
exactly
that she made, which eventually ended up becoming very useful in rallying the opposition.
Yeah, because people are like, I'll be that. If that's what it means, like, I'll be that.
And it's deplorable to be hungry. That's what we're doing.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's not to suggest that I support the candidate or his policies. But at the same time, we posted something after our walk that said, if you're one of the people who truly can't understand why someone would vote for Trump, then that's ignorant too.
Yeah, if you're one of those people, like, I can't wrap my head around
because they've been very clear.
They have been.
They've been very clear. He has been very clear as to why people vote for him. And if you're just not listening or you choose not to accept it, then you're no different than what they're doing about climate change, reproductive rights, and all the things that we yell about. Like, at some point, we have to be willing to listen.
Yeah. Yeah. And, that's actually one of my biggest takeaways, and we'll get to that in a second, but we have to be willing to listen, and it may not sound as eloquent as you want it to. But aren't we used to that in our own little corners? Like, let's just keep it real, right? And I think for me, the other thing was just how much the election reminded me of corporate America. And not so much the election, but specifically the Democratic Party, which is the amount of stock that is put into decency, as if decency is this magical sword that cuts through rational thinking or anger and all of those things. Like, and it's not. It's like, if anything, it's just like a limp wand. You know what I mean? Like, it works sometimes, but like it's a largely and has been a pretty ineffective tool. It's like we keep bringing decency to this gunfight as if it is like this super effective tool. It's not working. It's a ping ping kind of gun when like things are going like bang bang. And it's like we just have to be willing to get dirty. And I also remember as I'm reflecting back on 2016, and our son wasn't born then, but I remember thinking like it was all theory then, like, wow, as we were, thinking about becoming parents, like how do you explain this to a child? Because a lot of those conversations were happening because they were really talking about how Hillary at the time, very similar with Kamala, these images of young girls and what does it say as a society? And it's like, we have to stop framing it up that way and start thinking about, yeah, no, what does it say about society? What does it say? Right? We have to really look at it from a standpoint of saying, no, they are perfectly fine. Like they're not ignoring what you're coming with. They're perfectly fine with it.
Yeah.
They're perfectly fine with saying this is what masculinity looks like. This is what strength and power looks like. This is what we want from leadership. And so when we show up with a bunch of, powder puff coaches, and that's not a knock on,
Tim.
Tim. Like I actually liked him, but I'm talking about like just as a whole, like
Yeah.
this whole decency, well-spoken, articulate, overly educated career politicians who are much more likely to schedule a panel discussion in a forum
Yeah. A
than be
Zoom for
willing
fundraising.
to
Yeah.
roll up their fucking sleeves and get dirty and talk back or fight back against an active threat. Like during drastic times, like that's what you need.
Yeah.
Like if we're in war times, I don't need a coach. I need a lieutenant.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And this is what I think is at the heart of the issue. Like we, and by we, I'm saying we, I do not consider myself, just like I don't consider myself a Christian in many ways. I don't consider myself a Democrat, but I have typically supported the policies and the party. And because I'm in agreement with several of the things and I used to share that vision, but I'm also someone who, I have an appreciation for critical thinking and I don't shy away from the ability to pick and choose what I can learn from a group of people that I may not necessarily agree with. Like that has never been an issue for me. And part of it comes naturally because of like my foundation is like rooted in food, and this general idea that most people grow up thinking that this is what you eat and what you eat defines who you are. And you identify with that thing as a blank. And that part of my brain was broken early. And I would learn to develop and to appreciate intrigue and to say, wow, you can't say, for example, I'll pick on my mom here because, she's a Jamaican woman and she takes great pride in the cuisine and the culture. And I remember when we first moved down to the South, she would say, I don't know, get it with grits. Grits don't have no taste, like it's just grits. It just don't taste like nothing. And I was like, well, neither does rice.
Right.
But you don't complain about rice. Neither does most bread or Johnny cakes or any of these things. Don't taste like nothing. But it's a core part of what it is. And so you can either continue to disrespect it,
Exactly,
knowing that what it represents, like grits mean something, to Southerners, and sort of disrespect it or to write it off, and so I just had learned to appreciate things. And, throughout my career, I was fortunate to have a lot of exposure and to travel quite a bit and learn from a lot of people. And I've used all of those things to shape my thinking. And I realized that even that in and of itself is, I won't say elitist, but it's a privilege. A lot of people have not had the privilege of traveling to places, to spending a lot of time with people who live certainly in middle America. And so, like I was not surprised I just wasn't surprised. I'm sorry. Like
no, I wasn't
I
either.
was rooting for it, but I was not surprised. I'm arguably less heartbroken, maybe because I've been here before. And my hope is that we can help those people who've never been here before get there. And I think for those of us who have been here before several times over, but have found a way to numb the feeling,
That's it.
then my hope is that at the end of this conversation, we can at least just recalibrate that feeling a little bit. Like first acknowledge it, that like, that's called numbing. That's called avoidance.
Yes. And it's unfortunate that a lot of our therapy and self-help talk almost exacerbates the numbing. There is a level of stress and sadness and grief and all kind of feelings that people felt yesterday, but you immediately open your phone and you go down this scroll hole and you're surrounded by messages that tell you to turn away from it all, isolate yourselves, distract yourself. And I think that does a disservice. I actually think you have to feel the stress in order to make room for the data, for the truth, right?
Yeah.
Stress is a natural response when you feel threatened. It's natural, it's biological. It is the thing that has kept humans alive and avoidant of predators and death on a regular basis. So if you teach yourself not to feel it, if you teach yourself that it's bad and it needs to go away immediately and you need to fix it with something, then you don't get the brain mapping that happens after that. Because if you allow your brain to feel it, then the next time you encounter some stress, then you are better suited to deal with it.
Yeah.
But the reality is a lot of us have leaned into the confusion excuse. And I'm calling it that because we've been here before. It is an excuse to say that you're confused as to why anybody would vote differently. They've told you why they would
I'm
vote
about
differently.
to talk about that. Yeah. Right.
And I think a lot of us are still believing this myth that Democratic Party is the party for minorities. And this election proves that that is not the case anymore. The Democratic Party is the party for college educated women and their spouses.
Passive aggressive professionals.
And Black women, right? Like,
yeah.
Black people. I
Yeah.
can just say Black people because 80 something percent of Black men also voted for a Democrat this season. But like, at the end of the day, it's not for minorities in general. Asians voted for Trump overwhelmingly against Biden. Not overwhelmingly, but the majority of Asians voted for Trump against Biden. The Latino community has voted for him in this election. And so this idea that your ethnicity or that your gender is what determines your party is a piece of truth that we need to unlearn, because that's just not true. And if you can remove that and start to have conversations with people who look like you, who you may assume have the same values as you, then you can understand that there are other factors that they consider in their decisions.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit more to the people who just can't wrap their heads around it. And I am going to do myself a disservice here by adding a disclaimer. And so I will give you a bit of a standard. I apologize now, right? I apologize in advance. I'm not trying to disrespect you, but I want to prove to you that you're full of shit.
Your brain, not you.
No.
It's a habit.
Well, here's the thing, right? Like if we're still saying things like, I can't believe, let me ask you, so you mean to tell me you've never worked for a dickhead? You've never worked for an asshole? You've never thought for a second that you would be willing to leave that job, or even if you're an entrepreneur, take bigger pay to work for or with someone if it meant that you would get some more money. And if you can look in the mirror and say that, then you absolutely should never fix your lips to ever say that you can't wrap your head around why people who are hungry, broken, who feel abused would vote for someone who they openly know is a racist, a convicted felon, a abuser and of women and the tax code and all of the other things, right? You can't say that. You do understand. You're just not listening, and you're not paying attention, and you're not acknowledging that what you experience on a day-to-day basis is vastly different from what another group of people are experiencing.
And you're not acknowledging the idea that those character indictments don't affect the way they think he can do the job.
Correct.
They don't care what he does in his private time. If he is philandering with porn stars and paying them off, that has no impact on how he does his job when he walks into that Oval Office in their minds.
Correct.
And there are lots of us who hold that disconnect for people as close to us as our parents. There are lots of us who rationalize bad things that good people do.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, that's normal. I think they look at our party, they look at the Democratic Party and say that we're not being honest. We're not being honest about the fact that our candidate maybe had some cognitive decline and that we pulled the okey doke and skipped the line and didn't even allow big donors to present a candidate. Like they're not being honest about any of that. And there's something to be said about transparency and a leader who is upfront about his crimes and discretions and or indiscretions and his vices. There's something to be said for that. I'm not saying that I agree. I'm just asking everybody to think about all the places in your life where you make those kind of exceptions and ask why you're not willing to make them for authority figures in government. That's cultural. That's cultural that we think that people who lead our country and who lead our companies are supposed to be morally superior. It's not true. We know that. We know that they don't have better morals, or in many cases, the way that they got to the top is by blood on their hands. But at the same time, for some reason, we have this cognitive dissonance where it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the Democrats have done when both parties are not perfect.
Yeah. I think you woke our son up that day, and he's only 7. He doesn't fully understand it, but that was the first time I also had to have a little bit of that conversation, because I remember, days leading up to it. Certainly in our area, there seemed to be this steady propping up of signs, and it was very clear that certain neighbors, not exactly in our community, in our specific subdivision, but in the community, we started to see quite a few more Trump signs popping up. And, our son, he's 7 years old. He just kind of felt like that was all he needed to see. He was like, oh, he said, I feel scared. I was like, why do you feel scared? And, he was like, oh, because I just, he's, that man is not a good man. And, he's not these things. And I was just like, man, like, I was reminded of what my role is as a parent. And I did not just tell him, oh, he's not a good man, or, I would listen. I said, I'm going to tell you exactly what it is. And we had this conversation. I centered it around, I believe it was baseball or something like that. Cause that's his thing. So I can always use that as an easy route. And I pretty much told him both sides of the story. I said, you have a pretty nice bat and you like your bat, right? Yeah. And you get some pretty good hits with your bat, right? Yeah. Well, what if we just to let everybody use your bat? He was like, no, but that's my bat. I said, and then we paid for it, right? Yeah. Okay. But, this person doesn't have a bat, or their bat isn't as good as yours. So you should be comfortable paying as much money as you did for your bat and letting everybody on the team use your bat. Like, does that seem fair? He was like, fine. He was like, okay. And we just kept on going and going. And then after a while, he was like, well, how come they can't make their own bat? And it's complicated. I was like, you'll understand after a while. No different than we're in the middle of our fundraiser right now. And by fundraiser, I mean his school is doing their biggest fundraiser. And I can see the numbers. And our son, is one of who knows however many in the classroom. And like the vast majority of the funding has come through his link and not the other students in the classroom. And so the class as a whole gets to win this surprise. And, it's like, yeah, if you were in that classroom, you would have got a different surprise. You would have got a much bigger surprise, right? And so this is an experiment. This is a general kind of humanly designed experiment that we have here that we call democracy, where we've decided that this is what fair looks like. And there are some people who are just tired of being on the losing end of fair, And, can you be mad at that? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, obviously you can, but like it's complicated. And so all of that to say, I empathize with the parents out there who had to have those conversations with kids who still have developing brains and points of view and are emotionally fragile and malleable. But I hope you're being honest with your kids. I hope you're being comprehensive with your kids. We certainly tried to be to the best of our abilities. And we were clear on what team we were in. It was particularly brutal because the team he was rooting for in the World Series lost. And then, not too long after that, the political candidate in the party that he was rooting for lost as well. But, the last
Listen,
thing.
the timing couldn't be better.
Yes,
honestly,
it's important.
He had been on a winning streak.
Correct.
And it's important to learn how to lose. In fact, that was what our newsletter was about last week, where I want people to know how important it is to lose. It's necessary for brain function. It's necessary so that you understand what needs to happen next time and what you didn't do. You need to be able to make sense of your wins and your losses. And I'm sad that this is the way that he has to learn, but I'm happy that it's happening at this scale and we're in a place to be able to explain it to him.
Yeah.
We've left some of these institutions because we know how they work.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about creating plans and strategies, it's so that, son, you understand that you don't ever have to be a part of an institution or a system that you don't feel like you can win. Nobody wants to be that, which is why the election process is so important and why the pendulum swings each way. Nobody wants to live amongst constant losers, right? Like nobody wants to live among people who never believe that they can win.
Yeah.
And this is what we're learning.
I'm certainly old enough to remember when Bush was elected in the 2000s and people thought that it was, the end of the world, and how could so many people vote to elect this guy? He's an idiot. And then I remember the first Trump era, and oh my gosh, I can't remember. We're showing who we are. I'm at that sweet spot, I think, where I've seen this movie before. I believe we will survive, but I do think it's of critical importance for us to reevaluate our points of view, to discard some ineffective approaches to thinking, certainly to discard certain sources of information that we have used to shape our thinking in the past, and to better prepare ourselves for the world that we are entering into. And I think from a financial perspective, I think this will end up being the transition to the tactical part of this conversation. At least I hope it will be, in terms of like what people actually do. We are so familiar with this cliche that desperate times call for desperate measures. Yet what I repeatedly see is a failure to adopt a desperate measure. There's just a willingness to continue to have the conversation about how tough times are, how tough they have been, what led to these tough times, what we aren't doing in these tough times, but not nearly enough saying this will be the last tough time because here's what I'm going to do differently. And I'm not going to subscribe to thinking or organizations or habits or anything that contributes to the repeating of an outcome that negatively impacts my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, one of the things that I accepted early on, I talked about it with food, but I've accepted it in several parts of my life. Like, we have to be willing to learn from sets of people that we don't necessarily identify with. We should be able to say, you know what, I don't really rock with those people, but it seems to me as if what they're doing is effective in this moment and may be advantageous if we're willing to adopt it. We can't be so closed that we refuse to acknowledge effectiveness.
Yeah.
And I think if there's one thing, if you're a hardcore Democrat, you should be willing to accept, is that there's some value in having a radical sense of self-responsibility, an absolute willingness to design your life that is centered around the idea of not really reliant on a safety net or a system or a government. And we call them all kinds of things, like these, what do they call them? Doomsday preppers. We call them, they got their guns and they've got,
their bunkers.
But you know what they know how to do? They know how to prepare a meal at home. They know how to get by while maintaining a good quality of life. And that's different, because a lot of people that I know how to get by while sacrificing their health and all those other things, right? But they're not willing to find a more aggressive balance that doesn't sacrifice health or, well-being as a whole. There's something to that has to be a core part of, I think, any path going forward. And this is the benefit of democracy. This is the benefit of having, to a certain extent, a two-party system. You have other parties who do have good proposals. I sound like a politician saying that. I sound like a moderate, but like this,
you are a moderate.
But there's something to it. There's something to it. And I just want us to feel the frustration and the pain, but I also want us to be, if you're not willing to listen to Republicans, then at least be willing to learn.
Yeah.
And that is what my hope would be, that this leads to a drastic shift in the way that people think about their finances, and the way that they think about economic frailty, and the way that they think about the role they play in securing or shaping their financial future. And because without question, right, if the first couple of days is any indication, the stock market loves Trump.
Oh, yeah.
And if you can't even say that you have benefited from that, then you are unfortunately at such a huge disadvantage, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Like you at least can sleep well at night knowing, well, look, these other issues may be happening. And this may be in contrast to what I said before, like, having greater return does not make you feel more safe in like deeply, tragic moments, sure. But generally speaking, you want to be able to clothe yourself comfortably and house yourselves and nurture relationships, which requires resources and so on.
Yeah.
And so my hope is that out of this we can overcome the sadness and find some comfort in our abilities to just think a little bit.
Yeah. I love that because I think you're right. I think we have gotten far too comfortable talking about the desperate times instead of embracing the desperate measures. And I think part of that is because of our education, because of
Hmm.
our cultural obligations to be caretakers and protectors of all,
Hmm.
that we've also forgotten the fundamentals. We've forgotten the fundamentals of our economy and we've forgotten the fundamentals of personal finance.
We ignore them
We
because
ignore
it's
them.
too simple,
It's too
and the
simple.
world is far too
We
complex.
crave
And
complexity.
yes,
We crave it. We crave taking things out of context and exploring one context super deeply, but ignoring the other context that exists, right? There are several contexts that are happening at any given time. There are multiple truths that are happening at any given time, and each party is just a collection of those. And what we're seeing is the Democrats' failure to recognize that the values are shifting for the country and that they do want to be consumers first. And that's okay. There's a way to be a consumer first and still take care of the environment. There's a way to be a combination of many things. But when you double down on messages that don't resonate, and I'm not blaming the party, what I am saying is when you double down on messages that don't resonate, in a lot of ways, you
yeah,
are also the political party who refuses to change. And we have to acknowledge that. And so I think where I want people to land is one, to revisit the fundamentals of our economy. We are a capitalistic, consumer driven economy. 70% of our GDP comes from people's ability to buy things, things that they want and things that they need. A lot of the billionaires who had a vested interest in this election are people who run consumer companies. Amazon, energy, auto, healthcare, tech, social media. Whether you're consuming information or consuming it don't matter. They need you to continue to consume. And so whichever candidate is most interested in helping you consume more, that's the candidate they're going to support. That's the fundamentals of our economy. That's just how it works. We're not agricultural. We're not manufacturing, although a lot of people would like us to be. It would take generations to get us back,
yeah.
or robots, right? Like there's an argument for that. There's an argument that we can return to a manufacturing led country if we adopt AI and robotics, which again, some of the billionaires that are behind this president absolutely believe that without regulation, they can get us there. And that's what people are voting on. That's what people are betting on. That's what we've talked about the billionaire race for years when Meta was trying to launch the metaverse, right? We've been talking about billionaire visions for years because at the end of the day, progress in the United States has always been a combination of private and public. Government is a public run institution that relies on private enterprise for funding and for jobs and for economic security as much as they do taxes. And so this has always been the push and pull of our country. Those are the fundamentals of our economy. When those things are threatened, people experience high levels of stress. When people experience high levels of stress, not everybody has the ability to numb that out with more purchases
Right.
or different vacations. Some turn to drugs and alcohol, which we're seeing a rise in that. Some turn to gambling, which we're seeing a rise in that. And some just turn to burning the whole thing down and electing someone who they believe will drain the swamp. That's a fact. That's a fact. So the question is, what do you do when you feel high levels of stress? How are you treating that? Are you processing it or are you numbing it?
Yeah, I think most people, to your point, are numbing it, right? And which is a hell of a privilege, right? And they may not necessarily see it that way, but that is a reality. And I will say, we experience it even in our close circles. We try to not step on their toes and the people that are in our lives, but we see it all the time. We see people with absolutely bloated households that outsource practically everything, that don't cook a single meal at home. And we don't call these things out because we feel like we're shaming people and they don't have time and they come up with all these other things. And it's like, okay, we went to someone's house the other day and this is the first time I'd ever seen it. And we walked in, it invited us over. We were all going to a concert and they had 3 big screen TVs in the living room. One like really, really big one, and then like another one that was east and west. It looked like a sports bar. I thought my
Literally.
my first thought was, I've never seen that before. 2, wow, that's really cool that they would do this because they're having company. And then I realized, like, actually, no, I think this is just how they roll. Like, there's a TV here, and then there were like 2 other TVs like on the wall, like behind it. It was like standing. It was like being at like a really big fancy sports bar where there were just TVs and a bunch of different games on. And I was just like, wow, like the what incredible, and this isn't to shame them, like we all have our own
You can make your
versions of,
choices. Yeah.
of wanting to enjoy things. There's nothing, wrong with that. But we have reached a point where like that is just normal for some
Yes.
people. And at the same time, there are some people who just not too far, a couple miles away from where they are, who don't have like a tenth of that. You
Don't
know what
have
I
a
mean?
TV in the
Don't
house,
have
or
a
maybe just
TV at all.
one TV,
Yeah. And
not one in every bedroom, and certainly not 3 on one wall.
not 3 on one wall in this room, not including what was going on in the other rooms, right? But yeah, like this is just where we are. And, if you don't like being called a coastal elite, then maybe we shouldn't call them flyover country or,
Yeah.
whatever. Like this is just kind of where we are. And I guess to the media's credit, the last thing I'll say is they've at least kind of accepted. They've accepted, and they said the people have spoken. And by the people they mean the majority, the unfortunate majority of people have said like, "Nah, man, it's tough, and I'm sick of it, and I'm not here for it. And if you're not talking about those things or willing to fight to protect those things, then I'm not here to support you." The last thing I will say is this: I I did not walk away after watching her concession speech impressed or inspired. And I feel like I may be the first person in my circle to say that. I understand that I may be too soon. I understand that maybe some of us don't want to place the blame on her. She fought a hard battle. There were all these things. Um, but it felt like I was watching a corporate executive phone in a conversation. Like, not only did it not make, I didn't feel like it made supporters feel like it wasn't a hug for hardcore supporters. It wasn't a, you know, deep hug for the team that helped to prop her up and get her there and execute what I do think was overall a really, really great campaign given the constraints. Um, it also didn't feel like an I'll be back fighting harder. It felt so in between, like, and it didn't even feel like defeated. It felt like I'm checking the box. And I think what really, when she conceded, and then I think she said something to the effect of, while I concede the election, I don't concede this fight. I wasn't moved.
Mm.
I just wasn't moved. And, I can only imagine how exhausted she is. So I will say maybe that's it. There's maybe a lot going on. But what I would have loved to see, because I think it's indicative of the issue that we're speaking to with respect to the Democratic Party, is just a willingness to just speak from the heart. Like, call out the people, man, that helped to get you there and, stayed up just as long and fought just as hard.
She can't do that. She can't do that because
that inherently to me is part
she
of
is
the
a
issue.
yes, but that is part of the
This
issue of
preference for decency will be
it's
the
not
death of us. I'm
it's
telling you.
it's an oath. It's an oath that you take as a government official. She is still the vice president. She cannot cross the line into being a civilian. Now, to your point, Democrats interpret that oath very differently than Republicans
We're
do.
taking it
And
literally
it's
here.
yes, and it is to our detriment. We still believe that we have to have perfect candidates. There are still people who are talking about her credentials and her experience in government
This is the
as the
second time
reason
now,
why
guys.
it's unfair that she didn't win. And
This
it's
is
like
the
you're
second
missing
time.
the point that people don't want that.
Right. Overqualification is not is not real. It doesn't matter. Right. So that
Because it
can't
means you're
be
removed from what it's like to actually live
that
here.
can't be the card that we're still continuing to play. What are you gonna find? Are you gonna put Katanji on the ticket next time? I'm just making it up. But like, come on. Like you don't need more qualifications. Like there has to just be like I think what I was looking for was more passion because I certainly felt like the people in the crowd were filled with passion,
Oh, can
right?
you
They were
imagine?
filled with passion.
This has been
She
the
didn't show up the
largest.
night before. They wanted to feel something,
Yeah.
you know? Like I watched.
But this is the problem to me with our consumer driven economy and now political process because she raised $10 billion. It was something crazy.
Mhm.
And maybe she didn't raise 10 billion, but something in the tens of billions was spent on ads. And I talked about this a little bit in the last episode. And when people spend their money on things, whether it is a candidate or a car or a new jacket, they expect to feel something and they expect to feel that thing for a long time, depending on how much money they spent, how much effort, how much belief was baked into the receipt or the packaging of whatever that thing is. And that's not where it comes from. That's not where it comes from. We have to accept that that's not where it comes from. You don't get passion from a political figure. It doesn't come from that. Now, you may choose to direct the passion that you have inside of you towards somebody's message, towards somebody's policy campaign and platform, but it didn't come from them.
Yeah.
It came from you. You got to decide. You have to decide. That goes back to the fundamentals of personal finance. You have to decide what your dollar does for you. We outlined this in our book, The Purpose of Income. You have to decide what that purpose is. And a lot of us have gotten stuck in this flexibility phase. We've forgotten what it feels like to be financially insecure or food insecure.
Oh, yeah.
And what that leads you to believe and who that leads you to believe in. We've forgotten what it feels like to be on the other side of it, outside of being stretched for every dollar and in a place where you can look at things pragmatically and objectively and say, well, either outcome is possible. So let me hedge my bets, not assuming one way or the other.
Yeah.
We're stuck. And at some point, you got to wake up or we'll be right back here in 4 years because there are far many more Trumps, way many more Trumps and Trump prototypes. Maybe they're a little bit younger, so they know not to say things on a hot mic. Then there are Kamalas and Joe Biden's, people who have dedicated 40 and 50 years to the system and to the institution. There's far more of them than there are of the Dems. We got to change something. We got to be willing to demand something and not just like wait for it. In all things, not just political, but with our money too. I think next episode, we're going to talk about underconsumption. Because to your point about the 3 TVs, I understand that we're a consumer-driven economy. I understand that all of us are free to consume what we want. But there is a level of overconsumption that has to be addressed.
Yeah.
It has to be addressed.
Well, I do not normally close this out, but you may be out of breath. And so I will take the last part and thank everyone for hanging in there. I hope you take a walk. You know, that has been helpful for us. If you don't take a walk, then find some other way to be physically active, to engage that body, to engage the brain, breathe.
And I hope you don't forget that 70 million people voted one way and 70-something million people voted the other way.
Yeah,
when you're looking at someone, whether they look like you, sound like you, live in your same day, you don't know. So the best way to go about these conversations is to go in with a learning mindset and with a conversational, non-judgmental understanding of the fundamentals of our economy and the fundamentals of personal finance.
Yeah. Well, thank you for listening to another episode of the Rich and Regular Podcast. If you like what you heard, leave us a 5-star rating and review. And we will see you guys next week.
If you like videos like this and want to see more, make sure you click subscribe and turn on notifications.